Thou, all-shaking thunder, strike flat the thick rotundity of the world!
It's important to know that you're not seeing a film of King Lear. You're seeing a film of a stage production of King Lear. You don't immediately associate King Lear with a young audience. I wanted, I think, to explore what was inside that play that might be relevant for a young audience. And as soon as I started to think about it from that perspective, it became very clear that the play had a lot to say for young people, because it's well, it shows two families in meltdown, really, two families in breakdown, quite severe breakdown. And it shows siblings in crisis as well. I have siblings, a lot of people have siblings, and they might know what that feels like. So points of connection there for a young audience. And then there's also these extraordinary father figures in the play. There's Lear himself, and then there's Gloucester, who are flawed characters.
Thy truth then be thy dower, for by the sacred radiance of the sun, the mysteries of Hecate and the night, here I disclaim all my paternal care.
And King Lear really unpacks that, I think, for an audience, about what drives a father when they're feeling at the end of their authority, what drives them to act the way that they do. And then there is the rich landscape of the play. You know, this is a play that encompasses all sorts of things, from death to madness, to passion, to lust, to envy, to jealousy, to disguise, to loyalty and to love. And so, as in any Shakespeare play, all those things coexist in a really exciting story. Any director of any play has to, I think, enable the company to own the play. So I made this big decision quite early on in the edit that I would compress the action of the play, shorten the action of the play. I think in Shakespeare's it spans over many months. In this production, it spans 7 days only. So the first scenes of King Lear in our production are on Christmas Day, and the end scene of this production is on New Year's Eve. The very last moments of the play are the chiming of Big Ben in London, which marks the beginning of New Year's Day, so midnight on New Year's Eve. And it felt very nice. It felt very nice to mark the play and the journey of time and the passage of time in the play over these 7 days, to think about what happens in between. I think it helps a young audience get a handle on a very sort of pragmatic understanding of where we're going from day to day. So in the production you'll see a calendar, you know, and then the whole context of that period, the time from Christmas Day to New Year's Eve. It's a time traditionally in the UK, and I think probably in many other countries around the world, where families come together. And so that's what happens in King Lear. Families come together. They come together with disastrous consequences. And very often, actually, at Christmas time or that time of year, families can come together with disastrous consequences. You know, it's when we might not spend much time with our mums and dads. We might not spend much time with our siblings. But at that time of the year, you're forced often into a small space and you have to coexist. That felt very good, because King Lear is about that family, and about that family coming together, and about dad making a decision about that family. And it felt more intense if dad makes that decision about that family at this special time, because everything feels a little heightened at that special time, and the rows that have been buried for the rest of the year might come up and surface, and the resentments and the difficulties. So Edmund has been resenting his brother Edgar for a long, long time, and it feels like, well, Christmas might be the right time for those resentments to bubble up. The other great thing about setting it at this period of time, in this calendar time, is that, of course, it presents lots of great suggestions for design and for stuff around the play. Every play has to have a context or a setting, you know? You can't just set the play on the page. As soon as you take the play away from the page, you have to find where it lives. And so it lives, as the play begins, it lives on Christmas Day. And so we thought about what happens on Christmas Day. So as the play begins, you see members of Lear's family drinking, playing charades, waiting for their dad, waiting for the presents to be opened. You also see poor Edmund, who you don't know is Edmund at the beginning. You might think he's just a servant. You might think he's serving drinks. That's what he's doing. And he's dressed in an absurd Rudolph outfit. You won't know it's Edmund, and then, quite surprisingly, I hope for an audience, Gloucester identifies him as his son. This is my son, Edmund. Yeah, so Lear is almost, my idea of the worst father possible, really, who forces his family every year to dress in a certain way, to wear certain things. There's a lot of, novelty ties that are worn. Poor Gloucester has an awful Christmas jumper that he wears. And then the poor girls are forced to get their recorders out. And as soon as you hear that sound, particularly if you hear those tunes played by that instrument, I hope you're suddenly transported to your own sort of associations of that time of year as well. Doesn't have to be Christmas. It could have been anywhere, but I chose Christmas because, there are lots of other themes as well around homelessness. I wanted the idea this was set at winter time. They eject their father out into the streets, and that's not a good thing to do at Christmas. It's not a good thing to do at a family holiday. It's not a good time to do it in the cold and wet. So that this festive time, this winter time, just sort of heightened all those qualities that are already in Shakespeare's play. So we had this descent in the play. The play starts in richesse and grandeur and comfort and Christmas and family. And so we have this wonderful floor, this carpeted floor. We have fairy lights. So as the play goes to a darker place, as the action of the play moves from the indoors, from domestic to the outdoors, to the heath, slowly things start to fall apart. And I wanted again to locate this play in an identifiable location, And if I did a mythical Forest of Arden or a mythical place, not so interesting for me than a really identifiable urban landscape. So as the carpet comes up, we see the yellow lines on the floor, we see gutters, we see grates, and the flip side of that rich carpet is grey and cloudy and overcast. So we're slowly changing the whole sort of look and feel of the space. And as we do that, the characters also change. So of course, Edgar disguises himself as Poor Tom, and Poor Tom in Shakespeare's play or in productions that I've seen is some strange mythical madman. No, in this production, Poor Tom, Edgar, is an identifiable beggar. He's a beggar. They call him a beggar. The word beggar is used. So what do I understand by a beggar? Someone who is so destitute and on the very edge of their existence, who needs money, who comes up to the audience in the theatre performance, goes into the audience, do Poor Tom some charity, whom the foul fiend vexes. It's there. You see people on the streets asking, do me some charity, whom the foul fiend vexes. So the identifiable character is very important for me, and the breakdown is very important to me, until the very end, where just before with the Dover Cliff scene, we even lift the stage up, and a panel of grey and oppression is then erected, and a kind of earthy, rubbled landscape is revealed, which is where Edgar leads his father, supposedly to the edge of Dover Cliff. Of course, he's not near Dover Cliff, and takes his father to the very edge of despair and gets his father. What he thinks he does is to get him to kill himself. He doesn't kill himself. He learns about himself. So that was the movement with Christmas. There's something, little bits of tinsel still there, and the fairy lights that hung around the stage. And as the wind started to move, then the fairy lights started to move, and a sense of everything breaking apart, everything disintegrating. And some kind of redemption. There's not really much redemption at the end of King Lear. There's a hint that it will never be as bad as this again, but still it ends on a very, very dark and difficult note. I think there's a possibility when you think about editing Shakespeare that you might just do one aspect of the play or come in at one angle to the play. And it felt very important for me that I should try and tell the whole story. So the two fathers, the siblings, the two sets of siblings, the death, the blinding, the attempted suicide, and the final conclusion of the play. So trying to find in the edit a way of only bringing what was vital to that story.
Oh, you are men of stones.
What we lose when we cut a 3.5-hour play down to an hour and 20 minutes is we lose a depth of language and a richness of language, and we lose, I suppose, a sort of level of meditation that you find in Shakespeare's plays about the human condition and what it's like to be alive and what it's like to be sort of subject to all these forces that you see in his plays. But then what you gain in the edit is you gain a kind of, you gain a momentum, a kind of, I think sometimes a euphoria of a momentum of the story sort of grabbing you by the throat and dragging you to its end conclusion. And that's a real sort of addition, I think, when you take an edit. And in the edit, I've had to really push forward with the idea of family, the domestic situation, fathers and daughters, fathers and sons. That's been the motor to my edit. And I have, I've missed at times all the other philosophical stuff that happens in Shakespeare's play, but which inevitably we had to sort of, we had to move past. Certain themes are more pronounced in this edit than there might be in Shakespeare's play, or they are in Shakespeare's play, but it takes you a little longer to sort of find them out. Here, I think they're more not obvious, but they're more present, they're more sort of visible in a way. I want an audience to be relaxed, but I don't want them to relax. I want the story to keep them on the edge of their seats. And so what we see in Lear from the outset and for as long as possible is a benign, rather cuddly, gentle, giggly, jokey man, an old man. And we also understand, I think, in this production, that it's not, everything is not as simple as it seems, that there is something going on between these three sisters, but I don't want to make it obvious. So we worked quite hard in rehearsal about keeping Lear's explosion until as late as possible. Because otherwise, if you see it coming, you go, what are you doing, Cordelia? Why are you doing that? Why don't you just tell him that you love him? Just tell him that you love him. No, can't you see what kind of a man he is? He's a grumpy old tyrant. Don't do that. But if you play him as a gentle, sort of cuddly, slightly demented man who seems to be harmless, then I can justify why Cordelia goes, nothing. I love you according to my bond, no more, no less. And we as an audience are going, I don't think you should be doing that, Cordelia, but we don't have the evidence, we just have a hint. And so to hold that moment of explosion from Lear for as long as possible, I think supports the idea that no one really knows what he's like. And also he's slightly losing control of his mental capabilities. And that's a thing that I think we may know in our grandparents, we may know in older people, we might know in younger people as well. People who you can't read them very well. You don't know what they're going to do. You walk on eggshells around them because you know that something you say might trigger something off. So you read their signs and you go, I think he's all right, I think he's okay with this. And then you think that with Lear, Cordelia thinks that with Lear, and then suddenly Lear flips. And it's just, it's much more exciting theatre, I think, if it comes from nowhere. One of the most interesting journeys in rehearsal, I think, was around the character of Edmund, because, well, he's an extraordinarily dark-hearted individual, really, in terms of what he does. Again, I didn't want to sort of present a character who was dark-hearted and evil. So when you first see Edmund, he's wearing a Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer costume, which is good. It subverts what we think is obvious. But then there are some things about Edmund that you can't avoid. One of which, he's one of the few characters in this play who actually talks to us, the audience, has a soliloquy. There are other issues around Edmund that are quite thorny, one of which is that Edmund is illegitimate. This is a big plot line to the relationship. Edgar is legitimate in that Gloucester and his wife had Edgar, Gloucester and somebody else had Edmund. And in 400 years ago, and in Shakespeare's time, it was a big thing to be illegitimate. And there is a word that is used to describe an illegitimate person, and that word is a word that's used a lot in King Lear, and that's the word bastard.
Why brand they me with base? With baseness? Bastardy.
He has a weight of prejudice on him about that word and about how, about his parentage. And that fuels his actions. So if I was to ignore that, I would have a real problem with King Lear to know why Edmund behaves the way that he does. He behaves appallingly. He tricks his father to think that his other brother is plotting his death. He then effectively tries to organize his father's death and his brother's death. He then tries to take over the kingdom. He is merciless. And there is a very clear indication in Shakespeare's play that that's because he is a bastard. And so it's been very interesting with the play, as it's toured the play, because that word is like a little bomb. You put that word in an actor's mouth, that actor gives that word to an audience, and everyone reels at the power of that word, which is kind of amazing, really. Words are very powerful. And that word seems to be very powerful. And I could have cut that word. I could have found a softer word. I could have found a word that you would still have got an understanding. But then it's connected to who Edmund is, that word. Edgar's an extraordinary character in King Lear. He disguises himself as a madman. He then can follow his father. His father doesn't know it's Edgar. And his father has the most terrible ride through King Lear. His father is blinded, his father is taken to the edge of despair, and Edgar is with him. And then in Shakespeare's original, we only hear reported that at some point on a field somewhere in the middle of the war, Edgar reveals himself to his father, reveals who he is. It's me, Dad, it's Edgar. And we hear reported from Edgar that then Gloucester is overwhelmed by this and his heart bursts and he dies. I wanted to see that moment. It's a huge moment. So I have made the decision in this play that we see it. We see it. So Gloucester is very keen for death. He wants to die. And there is a moment in this production where Edgar chooses to present who he is to his dad. And we see it happen. So Edgar wears glasses in this production, and he puts his glasses back on, and he gets his dad, who's blind at this time, to feel his face and to understand that this beggar man who's been helping him is actually the son that he thought he'd never see again. And so we see the resolution of that relationship. We don't just hear it reported secondhand. There's an aspect of Lear that is hard to ignore, which is the brutality of the play. Sisters stab sisters, sisters poison sisters, people are killed. And it's a delicate thing to think about when you're presenting work of such a brutal nature to a young audience. And so there is this gross act of violence. It's the most shocking. My mum, whenever she sees King Lear, she always closes her eyes at that scene. She knows it's coming. We know what happens. We know what happens. It's very clear what happens. So if we know what happens, why do we also need to show what happens? Because I think if you can release the imagination to do the work for you, it's a much more powerful thing. There's always that horrible sort of thing. Well, how are they going to do the blinding? How will they do the blinding? What will they use for the eyeball? The imagination is truer than the reality. So if I can keep that action in the imagination, then I think we can believe it much more than if we were actually to see the action itself.
Give me some help! Oh, cruel! Oh, you gods!
Being aware that in Shakespeare's King Lear, there is some really difficult stuff, some really impenetrable, stuff that really feels 400 years old. And one of the things that I have a difficulty with, I also love, but I understand there is a difficulty, is the character of the fool. There are lots of fools in Shakespeare's plays, and this fool it stands alone, really, in terms of his darkness and his language and his presence in this play. So the fool, pricks Lear's conscience. The fool tries to debunk Lear's actions, but he does it in sometimes almost an impossible way for a modern audience to understand. So I had to sort of solve the problem of the fool. And also, we don't have an idea of what a fool is. What the hell is a fool? We don't have that now. We could study Shakespeare, we could study history, we would understand what that role is. But in terms of a young audience not having that knowledge, I wanted to keep the quality of a relationship with Lear, but wouldn't be just a strange sort of abstract figure in the play. So with this production, what I've done is that I've combined two characters. So there is a character of Kent. Kent is a loyal follower of Lear who tries to speak up against Lear's actions, and Lear, again going off the handle, banishes Kent. Kent is banished, He's given a few days to get himself ready, and then he's off. And he also, rather like the Fool, he provokes Lear into thinking about what he's doing, what Lear's doing. So these two roles are quite similar in my mind, the Fool and Kent. Kent in disguise. So the main drive behind this production has been an understanding of how important it is for everyone to feel an ownership of Shakespeare, how important it is for everyone to feel that he doesn't belong somewhere else or is owned by somebody else, but he's owned by us. He's, you know, he would want that, I would want that. And so all our work in rehearsal has been about trying to find ways to make this work accessible, to make it ownable, I suppose, from how we've thought about the setting, to how we've thought about the language, to how I've done the edit, to how we have visualized the characters and the relationships between father and daughter and father and son. And it's an interesting thing to do, I think, for a teacher or someone who's thinking about unlocking this film and this play and Shakespeare in general, is to think about the decisions that were made in terms of setting, what choices were made in terms of what we understand Shakespeare to mean, this great literary figure, and trying to bring that down to a moment between two actors on stage or a moment between an actor and an audience on stage, because that's where Shakespeare exists.
For old lang